So today we're talking about leveraging Snapshot's user stories to manage your Salesforce org. And I'll be giving just a quick little bit of an intro to Snapshot, and then Bill Appleton, our CTO here at Metazoa, is going to take us through user stories. So just really quick about Snapshot. For those of you that are new to Snapshot, Snapshot is really a holistic org management tool for Salesforce admins. And we really kind of handle things on two sides of the fence. We solve a lot of problems inside of your org, and we also solve a lot of problems between your orgs. So if you look inside of the org, we do a lot of things like org documentation. So we have comprehensive documentation to document the structure of your org for compliance or administrator reference. We do org optimization and cleanup. So we can thoroughly analyze all of the metadata in your org and tell you what's not being used, help you eliminate technical debt. We have a suite of tools that manage profiles and permission sets. We can document them. We can do mass editing of them, intelligent merging of profiles. We can see security through the eyes of any user. So just lots of ways to document and optimize your security model so that you've got it in tip-top shape. And we also have a great suite of tools that help you manage users, doing things like remapping all of the workflows or data when a user leaves the company and becomes inactive, remapping that to an active user. Or maybe a user changes roles and you want to remap cases from an active user to another active user. So handling both metadata and data user management as your users come and go from your Salesforce org. So those are really some highlighted examples of the things that we do inside of the org to really help administrators document it, understand it, and keep it in shape. On the other side of the fence, once you get into the mode of your release cycles, we can handle a lot of problems there as well. So we have a full-featured clicks not code release management built into the tool. So, if you've ever used something like change sets, we can do a lot more, give you a lot more power and a lot more functionality, but you don't have to be a developer to use our tool. We work great for developers, but we also have a clicks not code approach that allows admins to manage release cycles with a lot more power and flexibility. We also do data migration. We have a really powerful tool for grabbing small or large sets of data and moving those between Salesforce orgs. So for use cases like, repopulating a refresh sandbox or grabbing training data from production and giving it to some developers to work with. We do a lot of things with data. We maintain all the relationships. We can scramble sensitive fields during a move. We can automatically generate templates for packages. We can map fields to different fields or objects to different objects if you're doing something like an org merge. So lots of ways to manage both your metadata and your data for your releases. And then lastly, what we're going to talk about today, user stories. It's really a powerful new feature that's added a lot of capability to our Snapshot tool. And it's really a way that you can, as administrators and developers, really manage all of the changes that are occurring across all of your orgs in a way that's secure, audited, and really understandable. And that's what we're going to dive into today. So next we're going to dive into the demo here with Bill, and we're going to take a look at that. So really all of those features come from one user interface that we call Snapshot. And today we're going to focus on our new feature, user stories. So with that, let me hand control to Bill here. All right, Bill, you can hop off mute and fire away.
All right, thanks, Tom. Let me share my screen here. All right, can you guys see my screen?
We got you.
All right, so my name's Bill Appleton. I'm the CTO over here at Metazoa, and I want to talk to you today about sprints and user stories. My engineering team wrote the first AppExchange application, Dream Team, which was a project management tool. And we learned a lot about project management with Dream Team. And so sprints and user stories are kind of, back to the future for us. And they really, kind of come full circle to let us bring what we know about project management into org management, into something that really helps admins make changes to complex Salesforce orgs. Now, a sprint is composed of a various number of user stories. And the user stories really go through kind of a life cycle of changes. And these are really what we call the Kanban stages of the story. And so they start out maybe just as a draft. Well, they're just being, kicked around, or a backlog. That's kind of, they're not up to bat, they're on the bench. But eventually a user story becomes requested. And when it's requested, that means that the super admin or the project owner is now asking a developer to take on this task and get it completed. And then in the middle, in progress, you have the user story is either in development, or it's just waiting on testing or waiting on development, or it's in testing. But eventually that story is completed and the developer kicks the story, makes a pull request and kicks the story into the deployment mode. And that's kind of the is done mode. And then at that point, it is either in deployment or is a finished deployment, or it can be archived, in which case it's now an immutable user story and sprint that can be used for compliance and can be deployed as well, but not changed. So these three Kanban stages, to do, in progress, and is done, map pretty nicely to the three new interfaces we've provided in Snapshot. And the three new interfaces are to manage the sprints, to update the user stories, and to deploy the user stories. So it starts out really with managing the sprint. And that's when you put the sprint together, you create the user stories that are needed for the sprint, probably pulling them out of the backlog, and then you assign them out to developers. And that's all the job of a super admin or a project owner, whoever that's going to be. And you can manage these sprints through our interfaces I'm about to show you. It could just be a simple to-do list, could be managed with a Kanban board, could be managed with a Gantt chart, depending on what kind of management style you have, what kind of sprint it is, and kind of how you want to work with it. The system's very, very flexible. And talking about Dream Team back in the day, that's the main thing we learned. Everyone has a little bit of a different idea about how to manage projects. And so, flexibility really is key. And we have a lot of other features I'll show you, including burn down graphs and the ability to have teamwork collaboration, all in the managed sprints part of it. So after the sprint is set up and the story has been assigned out to the users, then it's up to the individual contributors, might be a developer, might be an administrator, to update those user stories, to fill those user stories with content. And there's two main different types of content we're going to talk about. So one is, you're already familiar with, is metadata assets. And if you've used our deployment interface, you know what I'm talking about. You can have custom tabs, custom objects, over 250 different types of metadata assets, and you can put those directly in your user story, and they're saved there. And the other thing we have, which is new, which is this concept of before and after task management. And the idea here is, hey, look, the metadata API does not do everything. There are still some things that have to be done with the setup menu. There's other things that are institutional in nature. Have you informed the employees that the org is going to be out of service this weekend? Or for example, they might be things around testing, and it might be Salesforce, it might be other enterprise systems. So there's a lot of things you cannot do with just metadata assets. And so the before and after tasks are designed to cover those situations. So the basic idea is you're going to do your before tasks, before deployment tasks, then you do the deployment, and you do the after deployment tasks. And that's the complete user story. So it's a higher level concept than just a deployment. And the couple of other issues here we'll get into, including overlap awareness and pull requests and how all of that works. So then after the individual contributors have updated all the user stories and they're ready to go, they make a pull request, everything goes into deployment, the sprint is finished, and at that point, a release manager or an admin can deploy these user stories anywhere they want. They can deploy them into production, they can deploy them into Sandbox, they can deploy them into a repo, wherever they want those user stories to exist. And one of the big issues here that we'll get into is, what happens if multiple developers that have been working on different user stories collide on the same object? What if they make changes to the same custom field that are different? What do you do? How do you merge those user stories? And so that's a big issue. And so anyway, that's what we're all going to get into. I did want to show one more screen, which is our data model. And so our newest managed package, version 3.5, has a couple of new objects in it. It has the sprint object, and there's a related list of stories for every sprint and a related list of tasks for every story. So the super admin creates the sprint and sets up the stories, and then the individual contributors create all the tasks for their user story, and that's how that all works. There's also a history object related to the sprint, and that is for a deployment history of every time that sprint has been deployed. And it includes extra information beyond our regular deployment information because the sprint is a higher level concept than a deployment. And lastly, there's a template object there at the bottom of the screen. We think that deployment tasks are likely going to be reused quite a bit, so you can create templates for all of your deployment tasks and kind of use those as much as you would like. All right, let's jump into Snapshot here. And if you're familiar with Snapshot, these are all orgs and developer projects, and they can be connected for deployment and for other purposes. User stories are a new item here on the deployment arrow, so that we're going from this org to this org, and now we want to manage the user stories in between those two orgs. And so you can start out with the first interface. If you remember, manage sprints sets up the sprint, sets up the stories, update user stories. The individual contributors should go here, and deploy user stories. This is where release managers should go when the sprint is finished. One thing I wanted to say real quickly is all of these interfaces are Salesforce aware. So if you make one of the objects that I just showed you, read only for a certain profile, or not deletable, or whatever permissions you give on those objects will be reflected in all of these interfaces I'm going to show you. And actually, the new package has a couple of permission sets for super admins and release managers and individual contributors and so forth that kind of help you get started with the permissions. If you want to enforce this, it just depends on your work style and your how you want to manage things for your org. So let's look at managed sprints. So managed sprints will show all of your sprints down the left-hand side of the screen. You might have more than one sprint that's active at the same time. You can also look at your archived sprints. And when you select a sprint, you'll see all of the user stories for that sprint here in the center column. And then over here on the right, you can manage all of the sprints and all of the stories. So let's look at the options behind managing a sprint first. So for a sprint, you can give it a planned start date and a planned finish date, and a sprint owner. That's very important. And then these are some of the broadcast capabilities that we implement for sprints. Now you could do this in your Salesforce org with workflow if you wanted to, but we make it really, really simple to do this, and we'll handle it for you if you use Snapshot. So first is ability to broadcast sprint changes. So this will send an email to the sprint owner when a sprint is created or deleted, or the owner changes. And then you can also broadcast sprint deployments. So this will send an email to the sprint owner when the sprint is deployed. You can also broadcast story changes, and that will send an email to the story owner when a story is created or deleted, or the story owner changes. And lastly, you can broadcast stage changes. So then every time the stage for that story changes, the story owner will get notified. The other thing we have here is, this is an interesting checkbox, archive sprint. So when you're finished with a sprint and you archive it, you cannot change the sprint, the stories, or the story tasks. It all becomes completely read-only. However, you can still deploy the sprint. And so that's just super useful for compliance. You know, you've got a permanent record of what was built on that sprint, who built it, all of the comments, all of the documentation, and now it's permanently archived. So that's kind of an interesting option. And then we also have story options. So let's look at manage story real quick. So obviously the Kanban stage. And so here's the stages that I just showed you that the story can go through. You've got a story owner and you've got the user story. So that kind of shows you who, what, and why for each individual story. All of this stuff over here on the right is optional. And some of it, the top things, are kind of mainly used for Gantt charts. But then you get into planned work, actual work, and percent complete. This is helpful for the burn down graphs. And I'll show you that here in just a second. But really, everything's optional and it's very flexible. So you might choose, for example, to just manage a sprint with a to-do list. And so you can do that. You can do that with this center column right here. You might choose to use a Kanban board or a Gantt chart. So if you use a Kanban board, let's take a look at that. So the Kanban board will show you all of your different Kanban stages for this sprint as columns, and it will show you all of the different developers down the left-hand side. And then you can drag and drop all of these things very, very easily and make changes. So this is a great way to kind of see the different stages of completion for your sprint and the different people who are involved. Does one person have too much work? Is one stage overloaded? Is everything in testing? That's not good. So this really helps you kind of a bird's eye view of your project. Some projects, however, are longer running and have contingencies between the tasks. In other words, task B cannot start until task A is completed. And so traditional projects are good for that. And you can set up your sprint that way if you want. And actually, you can use all of these things at the same time as well, if that's what you want to do. We provide a burn down graph. This shows you expect on the diagonal at 45 degrees, and then actual progress, which is the red area. So for my test marketing project here, we're pretty badly behind schedule. So we need to pick it up here to get back underneath the expected bar. And then we, of course, as always, generate reports on everything that you can send out to team members. All right, so that's the basic manage sprints interface. Just to reiterate, you can create a sprint, you can assign out the user stories to developers, and then it's up to the developers at that point to go to the next stage, which is to update their user stories. Now, when you go to the update interface, it will just show you the sprints and user stories that you have been assigned. So right now, I'm a guy named Tim Barnes in my example data, and these are all my user stories for a sprint that I'm involved in, the marketing project. And so I can edit my user stories, and the basic idea is I'm going to create before tasks, create and delete assets after tasks, and then I'm going to update my user story. So that's it. It's just like a deployment, except, you know, from the source to the destination org, except now the source org is going to provide me metadata assets that I need for my user story. And the destination org is an example destination that I might test deployment against. So just to show you kind of how this works, I can create any number of before tasks, and I can give them, for example, if I manage this task, run command lines, I can give it a name, I can give it an owner, and I can give it an actual command line that it'll run. I can launch a browser. I can do a number of different things here. And so the idea is that this is something that needs to be done before deployment. And then I can choose assets out of the source org. And you see I've chosen a number of assets over here, a couple of custom objects, a couple of custom tabs. And it's just like our deployment interface. You're just selecting assets out of the source org. One thing that's a little different, though, is you'll notice some of these assets are in red. You haven't seen that before. Well, if you put your mouse over it, you'll see overlaps between my user story and other user stories in the same sprint. So if I have other developers that are also using the account object or the child ABC custom object, it will show me who it is, where they are, what's their story name. And so this could be completely planned. I mean, I could be totally expecting this and be worried if I didn't see it, or it might be totally a surprise. It depends on how big your development teams are, how much they communicate. But anyway, one way or the other, we show dynamically all of the overlaps when people are both trying to work on the same thing. Delete assets, we can select delete objects out of the destination org as usual, and then after tasks. And these are the tasks that need to be completed after the user story has been deployed. And so when I've got everything that I want, before, create, delete, and after tasks all put together, I can test the deployment, which will test these assets against the destination org and make sure that they're deployable. And then I can update story. And update story will look through all of the different changes that I've made and update my user story. And so it's like a deployment, except now those metadata assets and deployment tasks are part of an immutable object that is saved in your Salesforce account. It's there for deployment, and it's saved among all of your team members. So super, super useful in that it's not a deployment, it's something that could be a deployment, and it's saved permanently. All right, so this is then the individual contributor now updates all of their user stories. And when you finish with a user story, you do the pull request. And what this does is it moves your user story into the deployment stage and notifies the sprint owner by email. And then lastly, let's go to look at the deploy user stories interface. So you can always go here to deploy user stories. They can go into a sandbox or a production org. They can go into a developer project. They can go into a repository, wherever you want to deploy them for whatever purposes you have. But I mean, you know, the classic use of this is you wait until all of the user stories are in the deployment mode, and then you go to that sprint and you deploy it into production or into staging or wherever you want to you know, those metadata assets to actually to live in a Salesforce org. So let's look at that interface. So now I've selected that same sprint again, and here's all of my user stories. And I can also just say, you know, I want to look for user stories that are only in deployment. Just depends on what I want to do. Let's just show them all. And then I might, you know, only pick a few of them. This is a sprint option. It will let you move, you know, deploy only part of a sprint. Some sprints demand that you deploy the entire sprint or nothing. That's up to you. But let's just put all of these user stories together here, and let's look at what a deployment looks like. The thing to remember is all of these stories were probably written by different people who either know each other or they don't know each other, or they've worked together or they haven't. But it's all part of the same project that the super admin or the project manager has put together. And the first thing you do is when you look at these is you look at the merge conflicts. Now, for many user stories, I suspect there just won't be any merge conflicts. There won't be any overlap. There won't be anything, you know, this screen will just say, you're fine, just go to the next screen. Nothing to do. I've set up an example here that shows you some merge conflicts, though, just so you kind of get an idea of what this could look like. So this right here, we have a custom object, the account object, and we see different user stories that have made changes to the account object. So this story has added a custom field here. This story has added a custom field here. This story, management approval, has edited the entire account object, but there's no conflicts. There's overlap. It's interesting that all these guys are working on the same object. I mean, that's kind of an eye opener. You want to make sure that that makes sense, but there's no overlap. So, you know, they just add a custom field here, add a custom field here, no problems. And so we can just automatically merge those assets. And when we do that, it'll take this out of the asset overlap list. So let's do that. And now we've got another custom objects, And actually this is the same in all three different user stories. So we can merge that as well. So these developers maybe are collaborating, but for whatever reason, that's the same. Now we come to a custom object where there are differences. So one developer has one version of this custom object in their user story, and another developer has another version of this custom object. And so we have automated all of the merge and compare interfaces for these overlapping assets, and in this case, a merge conflict between two user stories. And what's cool about this is we've really focused you down on the exact issue at hand. So other systems will make you go into GitHub and do all of this with a text editor. And boy, you better know everything about metadata for that to work. We've really automated this and simplified it. Now, really, all you have to do is click the accept button. And so in this case, is this field an email field or it's a text field? I happen to know that I want it to be a text field. So I'm going to click accept, and then that conflict goes away. We go to our next conflict. Is it a text field or is it a pick list? I happen to know that it needs to be a pick list in this case. Now, what you could do too is, let me just show you this. What you could also do is you could say, wait a second, there's a conflict here. What are these developers doing? Don't they realize that they're both working on the same thing and they've done it differently? And then you can go to notify owners. And this is really cool. What it will do is it will send them the merge report that shows the conflict. So here they are. This field is different. There's a conflict. This field is different. There's a conflict. And it will notify all of the different developers, and it will send them an attachment with all of the XML that is in conflict so that they can kind of, instantly see what all the problems are. They can resolve it and send it back to you. So it's really up to you. And then lastly, here's custom tabs with no real conflicts here. So now I've kind of belabored this, and I don't want it to be scary. It's not, but it's definitely an issue you've got to deal with. So here's the way it would normally happen for something like this. You would come here and you would say, okay, these can just be merged. There's some overlap, but there's no conflict. Merge. These can be merged, definitely. Oh, there's some conflicts here. I want to accept this one. I want to accept this one. And these can be merged, and I'm done. Now, the other way to do this is if you come to this screen and you've done that before, you can click accept everything, and it will replay everything that you've ever done and automatically merge those the way you did the last time. And so after you've merged them all, if you think about it, this entire user story is now a source snapshot. It's a source of metadata that's coherent. There's no conflicts. All the overlaps have been approved, and you're ready to go. And the next step of this now is to compare that thing that you just merged and put together, the user stories, with the destination org. And so this brings you right back to the probably familiar compare assets interface that Snapshot has, where you can see all of the differences. There's 268 differences between the account object and the destination org. You can go through all of them. Hopefully there wouldn't be so many differences. And you can see things that are missing on the destination. They're never a problem. Some things are identical on the destination. That's fine too. But you can compare everything against the destination. And after you've done that, you just think about it. You selected your stories. You merged any conflicts. You compared it against the destination org. Now you're ready to do the deployment. And so the first thing you're going to do is the before tasks. So as you remember, those are not metadata assets. Those are institutional or testing or, whatever type of tasks that need to, done with the setup menu. Go into the setup menu and do this, do that, and it'll tell you how to do that. So, and then this is my task list here. And you can see for each one of these tasks, they're owned by different people. They might have come from a template. And so let's go ahead and do this. So we've got user testing here. I go to make sure the external integration is working as planned. Okay, I've done that. I'm going to mark that as complete. Now I'm going to run a command line. I run the command line. Maybe it does some kind of test. It gives me the results. These results are included in the final report, by the way, and I can click OK. There's my command line. And now I'm going to mark that task as complete. I've got to restore the admin profiles, go into the setup menu and do that. Mark these tasks as complete. You can have task confirmations. In other words, not only just mark it as complete, but force them to say, yes, I have finished this task. Here's user testing. Here's an interesting option. You're going to restore the admin profiles. You've got the option to launch the source browser. So it'll take you directly to the setup menu of the source org where I can do this task that's hopefully, written out for me here. And so anyway, I figure I complete all of these tasks, mark them as complete, and now they're all done. When I've done all of my before deployment tasks, I can go deploy the assets. And so this is just exactly like our deployment interface. And then I can deploy the metadata or do whatever I want to do at this point in time. And it will deploy the create and delete assets from the merged user story that I selected. And then after I'm done with my deployment, I can go to my after tasks and same thing. I can just make sure that any cleanup, restoring access or whatever is all done here through the task interface. So nifty thing is when you deploy a user story, if you remember back in the managed sprints interface, for a sprint, you can say, okay, broadcast sprint deployments. In other words, tell me every time this sprint is deployed, and also show me the deployment history for this sprint where I can see all of the history details. Here's the user stories that were included. Here's the before tasks. And notice this guy didn't finish some of his before tasks. Well, that's not good. I have to talk to him about that. And then here's the actual assets, results of the asset deployment and the assets that were deployed. And here's the after tasks. So everything is remembered. And now if we go into that sprint and we archive it like that, then now it is a permanently archived record of those merged. And now you can deploy that at any point or use it for compliance. So with that, I think I've spent half an hour there. I think I'll open the floor up to any questions or comments or anything that anybody might have.
Thanks, Bill. Hey, Bill, why don't you stop your share and make me the host? I'll go ahead and share our contact info as we're taking questions in the Q&A. So if you have questions about today's sessions, please put those. You'll see the Q&A button there at the bottom. Please put those in there, and that will allow us to get those answered. I see we've got a couple coming in. Let me just share my screen here, and let's go to our contact slide. So, by the way, if you're an existing customer and user stories is something that you think is useful, would be useful for your organization, you guys are getting into running these sprints and you really need more control over everything, we have unlimited personalized training for the life of your contract. So just reach out to us or go to the support menu in Snapshot and select schedule training, and we'll take you step by step through user stories and get you up and running with it. I know it was a lot to digest today, but we'll really help you customize it and tailor for your business process and your needs and really get you up and running with it. So if it's something that you can use, please do not hesitate to reach out to us and we'll take care of you. Also, if you're interested in seeing Snapshot as a whole, as we said earlier, user stories is just one piece of it. It's a full org management tool that helps you document, clean up your org, helps you manage your profiles and permission sets, and helps you manage releases as well as data. So, if you are interested in seeing the full look at the tool, just send us an email to sales and we'll be glad to set that demo up for you. You can also go to our website, metazoa.com. There's lots of scheduled demo links there, that kind of thing. And 14-day trial on the App Exchange. So you're always welcome to go to the App Exchange, search for Snapshot, set it up. We do nonprofit pricing. And if you're interested in other webinars where we cover subjects like this, we also events that we're going to, giveaways, fun stuff. It's all on our Twitter. You can catch us at Metazoa. So follow us there, and we can definitely help you with that. Okay, so with that, we've got a couple of questions coming in. The first one is about pricing. So yeah, we price Snapshot in a couple of different ways. You can reach out to sales to figure that out. We price it generally per org, where, your production org, you price it based on the size of your production org, and then all of your associated orgs come with it, and you get unlimited users for that. But we also price it per user. So if you have just, one admin, you're a small company or something like that, or just a couple admins and you want to buy it per user, we do that as well. And of course, as we mentioned before, if you're a nonprofit, we do have discounts for nonprofits. So just a couple of questions, Bill, for you. The first one here is, can this implement Scrum as well as user stories?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different viewpoints on Scrum, user stories, and sprints. Some people say that, Scrum, a sprint is only for Scrum, and that's what the 2 to 4 week time frame for the sprint is, and that's what Scrum's all about. And that user stories are happening continuously. They're not really organized as part of a sprint. So yeah, you can totally do Scrum. We're probably closer to Scrum than traditional user stories, but the other view of user stories is kind of a degenerative case of that. So it's really very flexible. And for example, you can have one story per sprint if you wanted to implement it that way, or you can have any number of stories per sprint. So it's really just up to you how you want to architect that and how you want to manage that, and your time frame and your requirements, and when things are finished and what needs to be completed and so forth. And so I think that's really all up to you. And hopefully we've made it flexible enough, and to also do projects with Gantt charts for some things that are longer running, that pass that 4 week period. So let us know if you have any trouble with that, but that's all part of the intent of the design.
Great, thank you. So here's the one that I think we kind of hit on this, or you kind of hit on this during your presentation, but I think it'd be great to really kind of make it clear. Where are the user stories stored, and can they be saved for compliance?
Yeah, so I actually forgot to show my a screen. I wanted to show that that Kanban view can also be in Salesforce. It's very easy to set that up in Lightning, and we have a view of that.
Would you like to show it, Bill? I'll go ahead and give you the ball if you'd like to.
Sure.
All right, let me make you a host real quick. You should have rights to share.
Okay. Yeah, so this is what I wanted to show. This is just Salesforce Lightning, their new Kanban view. This is the exact same Kanban chart that I showed you in our interface. And so, to answer the question, all of these assets are stored in your license org. So it's mega secure. We have no cloud. It's all stored in your license org, including the metadata assets that are attached to the user stories. So I really like that. There's a lot of advantages to it. For one thing, you can script it. You can add workflow. You can add permissions. We obey all of the permissions that you set up in your Salesforce account. Another thing I really like about it is you can move these assets between orgs. You can move sprints and user stories around as much as you want. As a matter of fact, our data set mover in Snapshot is super handy for moving sprints and stories if you need to do that. So it's completely native and it's completely secure. And so this is just, I think it's way better than trying to store all of this stuff in some kind of external cloud or external system that might not be secure. And it's really easy to take a user story and put it into a repository if you want to. As a matter of fact, you could put all your user stories in a repository, and then you could go to the repository and merge them by hand with a text editor if you wanted to. And that would be exactly the same as kind of the state of the art today in Salesforce. It's so much better though to have it automated and to have all of this stored in your Salesforce account. It just makes a lot more sense.
All right, great. Thank you, Bill. Really appreciate your presentation today. Hopefully that gave everybody a really good look about it. Oh, wait, we've got one more question here. I don't see stories. Do I need to update the manage package in Salesforce and client on the laptop? So the answer is yes. The client will update automatically when next time you log into Snapshot. So if you've logged in recently, you have the latest client, but you do need to update the manage package. So if you go to our App Exchange listing, go to the App Exchange, look for Snapshot, you'll see that we have the updated manage package there that includes the extra objects. So yes, you will need to update that manage package. And then once that manage package is updated, user stories will magically appear in that menu off of the deploy arrow, just like Bill showed during the demo. So if you have any help, need any help with that at all, just go to your support menu in Snapshot, hit live chat, and we'll be glad to walk you through it. But yes, you do need to update the package. We hide it for people who don't have the latest package, just so, you know, they don't have the underpinnings that they really need to make it work. So once you update that package, it'll show up. All right, well, thanks everybody. Really appreciate your time today. Hopefully we gave everybody a better understanding of the new feature we've added for Snapshot. If you're an existing customer, you've got it. Feel free to reach out to us. We'll train you on it. We'll be glad to get you up and running with it if it's something that you can use. If you're not an existing customer and you want to look deeper at Snapshot, again, just reach out to us and we'll be glad to give you a demo and give you a look at it. So thanks everybody. Really appreciate your time today. Have a great week.